everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Phil.
And I'm Pat.
And today we're going to be talking about player comfort during airsoft games. I want to start off by thanking you for tuning in. We're now several episodes into this series, and we really hope you found this content both interesting, educational, and most of all, entertaining. We wouldn't be here without you. So, on to the topic at hand, comfort, and to a certain extent, discomfort, are critical aspects of airsoft, but often not really discussed or considered. The basic fact is that if something is uncomfortable to do, you'll probably not want to do that thing. Or if you have no choice, you will want to do it as little as possible. Think about kneeling, for example. If the terrain you're on is very rocky and you're not wearing knee pads, you're probably not going to want to take a knee. And if you have to, you're likely going to want to move as soon as possible. And this actually has an effect everywhere. If you're too warm, or you're too cold, or you're hungry, or your feet are sore because your footwear is inadequate, etc. There's a huge benefit to being as comfortable as possible when playing airsoft. So today, Pat and I are going to talk about the ways that we've maximized our comfort during games and thus our performance.
I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but we are going to spend a lot of time over this podcast talking about things we have done wrong in the hopes that other people learn from our mistakes, because it's a good way to go.
Absolutely, and that's what knowledge sharing is all about. So I thought that we could start our conversation today with Pat talking about an item of clothing that we wear which is synonymous with cool, and that is suspenders.
I've been wearing a set of tactical suspenders with my airsoft kit for about 8 years now. They're one of the pieces that it went into my kit, and it's never, ever coming out. I run a lot of stuff on my primary line, so on my belt. And unlike some of my teammates, I've cheaped out. I haven't got a great belt. I really need to replace it. So I've got a so-so belt that has a pistol, a couple of pistol mags, a frag grenade, usually a Airsoft Innovations Tornado, M4 mag or two depending on the day, some sort of knife, presently a gigantic kukri because I'm silly, and a dump pouch, often half full of mags on it, right? That weighs a lot. And having to hitch up your trousers as you run across the field because your belt is not so great and your primary line weighs 10 pounds gets old really quickly.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that it's really uneven weight distribution. Like if you don't have suspenders, you have all of this stuff dangling on your pants. And even if your pants are probably well adjusted and your belt is cinched and stuff like that, you still have a lot of kit just sort of dangling off your hips, right?
Yeah, like it's great to have some of that weight distributed onto your shoulders. Airsoft suspenders tend to be, or tactical suspenders I should say in general, tend to be pretty robust. So they're broad pieces of elastic. They put a little bit of bounce into that kit so that it doesn't all hit you when you dive face first into a bush. They're really just great things in terms of making it easier to maintain running your kit for the whole day.
Yeah, so I've been using the same type of suspenders that Pat has been using as well for a long period of time. And they're great with the type of belt setup that we have because they loop right into the inner belt that you have. So they actually help keep your pants up, but your primary line, like your first line, the actual duty belt, you can actually remove it if you need to and still have your suspenders. It's not a big, complicated affair, right?
Yeah, that's a big benefit of the sort of inner belt with a Velcro on outer belt that a lot of my teammates run. But yeah, like if you're carrying a ton of stuff on your primary line, both, yeah, that version where you're able to ditch your primary line if you want to and just walk around comfortably is really good. But the suspenders really help keep everything in the right place, and consistency is king, right? So A, you're getting more comfort, you're getting more ability to wear them all day without it getting uncomfortable, but also your pistol is in exactly the same place it is every time you go to reach for it, which is a humongous advantage if you need to draw your pistol. Ditto if you need to get access to your mags or your frag grenade or your dump pouch, right? We often play in areas where it's inadvisable to ditch a mag because we're playing in boggy terrain or because getting back to where you are at the moment is going to be inconvenient because you're in the middle of brush, right? And you won't find your mag ever again. So being able to access your dump pouch to ditch a mag into your dump pouch as quickly as possible so you're not losing your mag is really, really useful. And it's a critical part of play in the areas we play in.
Mm-hmm. We talked about in the past on our videos and stuff how you want to keep your kit as tight as possible, right? And just having those suspenders will make sure that everything stays where it needs to be. Now, if you're not wearing a primary line, you have nothing on your belt, then sure, you might not need suspenders. But bottom line, you don't want to be that guy who is hiking up their pants all the time throughout the day, right? You want to be comfortable, and suspenders are a really easy and pretty affordable way to make sure that your kit stays where it needs to be.
Yeah, they don't cost a ton. And I mean, like, if you're one of those players who runs a couple of primary mags and 2 pistols on their primary line, and I've seen a lot of airsoft players who, because pistols are really fun to shoot, do carry more than one. We had a guy who played with us who sometimes tucked an MP5 onto his belt, a little MP5K. Having suspenders means that's not going to go anywhere, and that's fabulous.
Mm-hmm. Another complaint you often hear at the airsoft game is people whining about their feet. Right? They're saying, my feet hurt, my dogs are barking, whatever you want to call it. And that is a factor of making sure you have good footwear. And we've talked about in our Tips for Beginners video years ago about making sure you have a good pair of boots, right? A good pair of boots will protect your feet from rolls and all this kind of stuff. But with good boots comes having good socks. You need to make sure that you have socks that are appropriate for the type of footwear that you're wearing and also for the environment that you're playing in at that given time. So if you have really good tactical boots, let's say maybe you have combat boots or you have a pair of really nice Salomons or whatever, if you're wearing like athletic crew socks or like ankle socks, that's not the right kind of sock. It's not setting up your feet to be comfortable for a long period of time.
Absolutely. And you really want to go look into spending a little bit of money on socks. And that's the weirdest sentence to say, even as an adult. But you can get socks that are meant for hiking. There are often specific ones for summer hiking, for warm weather hiking, and for winter hiking. And they'll cost you a little bit of money, but they will absolutely make your feet a lot happier, right? Going home with blisters all over your feet after 8 hours of playing airsoft or 4 hours of playing airsoft, or if you have really bad socks and really crummy boots, 2 hours of airsoft is no fun.
Yeah, it
right?
sucks.
You know, we aren't soldiers. We aren't going out to like hike around the field, so we can take our boots off if we need to give the feet some air. But ideally, you want to be comfortable for as long as possible in your kit. So getting good socks is really, really critical. And you want to get sort of a moisture wicking base layer sock and then a heavier wool sock to go over that for winter. That's fantastic. If you're playing in Arizona and it's, 46 degrees, you probably don't want to put on wool socks.
So like Pat was saying, you can invest in some hiking socks, but there's also tactical sock options out there too. For years, I've been wearing Under Armour tactical knee socks. So they don't just cover my foot, but they come all the way to my knee. So they cover my shin, they cover my calf. And that helps reduce any sort of chafing on my leg as a result of the combat boot, especially because as boots get used and worn, some parts start to wear down inside and maybe it's starting to rub against the top of your ankle or something like that. So it's worthwhile having that extra protection. And these ones that I have are a little bit thicker, so they work well most of the times of the year. They're not great for the winter, but the rest of the time they're fine. And they're not cotton, right? They're made of a moisture-wicking fabric. So as my feet get warm and sweat, because of course that's going to happen as you exercise, that moisture is being evaporated and it's taken away from your foot, so you don't get like your swamp foot going on.
We're not really super worried about trench foot in airsoft, thankfully, because we're not out there for 18 days in a swamp. But yeah, you don't want your feet to hurt. You don't want to be hurting, right? You want to be comfortable while you're playing. You want to go home and still be comfortable as much as possible after playing. So no holes in your feet is definitely a good way to go. I want to mention boots. So when I started playing airsoft, I bought a pair of Blackhawk tactical boots for arid environments. Still have them. They appear to be indestructible. They're super comfortable, but I'm not sure they were the best to play when I bought them, and I'm not sure they're the best thing to wear now out of what I own. In fact, I don't necessarily wear them every game. Firstly, because we live in Newfoundland and it's often wet and cold here, and my hiking boots have a Gore-Tex liner, so they're waterproof and are a little warmer than my arid desert boots.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's this sort of impression I get from talking to a lot of new airsoft players, and I certainly was one of these people, where you're like, oh man, tactical boots must be good, otherwise why would the military use them? And the answer is, well, they're good as we can get within the money we're willing to spend on gear for soldiers, right? Regrettably, soldiers don't actually necessarily get the best of everything that they could possibly be given. a $300 at retail pair of hiking boots is probably actually going to do you much better than a pair of combat boots. They might last longer, but they're certainly going to have a better grip. They're certainly going to be warmer, better insulated, have Gore-Tex liners, all that stuff. Where the forces are just sort of like, well, we'll issue you better socks if we're sending you to an environment where you need better socks.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at Travis Haley's son, Flannel Daddy, on YouTube, that's Garantham, he has a video from a few years ago talking about boots. And his recommendation to other active duty soldiers is check with your unit to see if you can utilize civilian boots instead of the military boots. And he has a couple of recommendations. Salomons, of course, are, at top of his list.
Fantastic.
And that's because those boots provide you with the kind of support, comfort that you need and are still rugged enough to operate in basically any environment, right? So that's something you really want to consider. When you're thinking about your feet, you want to think about it as a system. It's not just your boots, it's your boots and your socks, and they work together to keep your feet comfortable. And you might be thinking, oh, well, Phil, you just need to soldier up a bit and just deal with it. But the reality is, if you're not comfortable during an airsoft game, you're not going to be performing at your best. I mean, minimally, you're just going to be uncomfortable and maybe you're going to be unfocused a little bit. But more often than not, you're going to be like moaning and complaining about the situation that you're in, about the discomfort that you're in, and you're just going to want to go home out of it, right? So that's no fun. So although it might seem lame to be thinking about, oh, well, you got to protect your feet, it really contributes to you having a better time on the field.
Plus, if you're buying boots with a good sole, with good grip, with good ankle support, you're not going to injure yourself, you're not going to fall as much, and ideally, you're not going to fall, trip over, and break your airsoft gun in half, right? Which can happen otherwise. So yeah, it's good for you, it's good for your gear, can save you some money in terms of broken airsoft guns, which is definitely a positive.
Another thing to consider with respect to comfort is how you're dressing for the game. So making sure, Pat alluded earlier, I mean, if you're wearing desert boots in a Newfoundland winter, that's not really going to work because your feet are going to basically fall off from frostbite.
Yeah, there was a point where I was so motivated by thinking, oh man, no, I have to wear my combat boots with my airsoft kit, that we played a game in February here and I wore desert combat boots to it, and man, my feet, I got out of the car and my feet were blocks of ice. Like, I was lucky I didn't get frostbite. I was lucky I didn't injure myself because of my stupidity.
I mean, the boots are one thing, but that applies to your whole body, right? And one of the concepts that are really important with respect to operating outdoors in general is dressing in layers, right? So as much as possible, you want to make sure that you're wearing a moisture wicking base layer, right? Bottom layer. So underneath my combat shirt, I always wear some sort of like technical shirt, like a running shirt or something, to get the moisture, to get the sweat off of my skin and into the fabric rather than just have it against my body the whole time. But that layering should continue, right? So you wear your base layer and you wear your combat shirt. And then if you're operating in a colder environment, maybe it's around 12 degrees Celsius, well, then maybe you have some sort of like light jacket or like a windbreaker or something like that on top of that. If it's colder than that still, like you may want to wear some sort of like intermediate warming layer, right? Like a fleece or something like that. And then a hard layer on top of that, right? And then maybe a jacket or a parka or Gore-Tex. And the whole idea is that, again, it's part of this system that helps keep you comfortable. So if you're too warm, you take off the top layer. And if that's still too warm, you take off that layer until you get to the comfortable middle ground. And once you cool off or you start getting colder because maybe the day's getting on and the sun's setting, you can then throw those layers back on. That's a very, very important concept.
And one thing that's also, I think, critical to remember here is you can look at hiking stuff as well as a lot of forces gear. I have several CF issue wool sweaters. They're super warm, they're super comfortable, but if I want something lightweight, grabbing a fleece is definitely a better approach. I get more or less the same amount of warmth for a fraction, like a third maybe of the weight, which is very helpful. One thing that happens a lot in airsoft is, as I was saying with the boots, you get people going like, oh, real armies issue these, real soldiers use these, I want to be as much like that as possible. And that's certainly a good mindset in some cases and in some situations, but militaries are moving towards issuing little light fleece jackets that are way lighter and easier to move around and smaller and easier to compress than the sweaters they used to use. It's why you can get a Canadian Forces wool sweater at literally every surplus shop in the world.
So temperature is one aspect of staying comfortable, but the other aspect is staying dry, right? So I've talked about like moisture wicking, but sometimes the moisture doesn't come from the inside, it comes from the rain. So typically your milsim games and stuff will go rain or shine. Your random weekend games may or may not go ahead if it's raining, but the reality is, so at some point playing airsoft, you will get exposed to rain or mist or what have you.
Especially if you live somewhere like we do that has a really variable climate where like you get rain showers for 20 minutes often, right?
Right. So staying dry is also a very important part of that. And there's a lot of different equipment that's available out there that you can use to protect yourself from rain and water in general. So for example, I have a US Army Woodland Surplus rain set, which includes the trousers and the jacket, which fit over my regular garments. So I can dress normally, but I can then throw this layer on top just to make sure that if it does rain, I'm not getting like completely saturated with water.
Whereas I have a Gore-Tex shell that is extremely light, completely waterproof. It goes on over all of my gear. It can go on under my tactical vest, but over layers that I'm wearing to keep warm. And it weighs next to nothing. I can fold it up really tight and put it in a backpack. I can strap it onto a backpack. It's super easy to carry around. I don't own any airsoft tactical pants, but I do have a set of Gore-Tex rain pants that I toss on underneath my combats if I think it's going to be wet.
It's hard to overstate how important staying dry is. If you're playing in an environment where it is cool, it's like 10 or 12 degrees Celsius again, and you are wet, you will be frozen by the time the day is over, right? So it is extremely important in that environment to stay dry. Even if it's warm, if you are soaked through, you are going to be chafing like crazy, right? Your underarms and stuff, it's just going to be raw. And fundamentally, if you are soaked to the bone, you are not having a good time. I mean, unless you're one of those weirdos that loves to be soaked through and having a great time and you love the way that sucks, then that's another conversation. But for the average person, if you are soaked to the bone, you are not having a good time. Right. And again, you're not performing at your best and you were doing this to have fun. Chances are, if you're not having fun, you're going to want to go home.
Again, I'm sure there are people listening to this who are like, well, just toughen up. I can push through a day or an hour or 4 hours or whatever of playing when I'm uncomfortable. But if we hit hour 6 or hour 8 or hour 12 of a milsim game and I'm low on gas and I'm tired and I hit a point where I really need to just push really hard to get an objective so that we can win, I'm vastly better off if I'm warm and dry and comfortable, or cool and dry and comfortable, depending on the season, than if I just am super sweaty and everything sucks.
At the end of the day, you want to go home and think to yourself, man, that was so much fun. I had a great day, right? And if you spent the whole day being cold and wet, you're probably not going to go home going like, man, that was so great. You're going to go home and be like, man, I'm frozen. That sucked. I can't wait to get a shower to warm up and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to have a retrospective on your day thinking about how great it was. What's really going to stand out for you is how much it sucked, how much discomfort you were in. And that's not what you're going for. This is a hobby. You might commiserate with your teammates and say, wow, that really sucked and blah, blah, blah. But you really want to think about how much fun you had, not how much more your kit weighed because it was waterlogged, right?
Yeah, like laughing because you slid down the hill into the mud and it's just, you're gross and it's hilarious. Totally a thing. But yeah, you want to be comfortable. You want to be able to slide down that hill into that mud and get out and be like, okay, cool, I can still play. I'm not messed up, right? Like, I'm not feeling shitty. I'm just laughing at the situation.
And the other thing Pat mentioned just a few minutes ago is around being out of gas. And that's a huge part of player comfort too. How much energy do you have right now? So firstly, if you are waterlogged and you weigh an extra 10 pounds from all the water and all this kind of stuff, you're expending more energy to stay in the game. That's one aspect. If you're cold, you're expending more energy to stay warm. That's another aspect. But also, as you're expending energy, what are you putting into your body as forms of other energy to replenish those sources, right? So a lot of players, especially if you're playing warmer environments, will tend to carry water in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's Camelback or water bottles at the safe zone or what have you. But there's also food. And we're not saying or suggesting, and we've talked about this in the past, you shouldn't show up to an 8-hour airsoft game with like a 48-hour ration pack. Like, that's not what we're suggesting.
Don't get me wrong. They are fun. It is nice to occasionally buy a ration
for
pack
sure,
and scarf them down, but like, you probably don't need 3,600 calories to play airsoft for 4 hours.
Absolutely. That being said, you do need some calories. So what did you bring for food? So recently we played a longer game at our local field. We were able to do like a doubleheader and we played basically all day long. So how did I feed myself during that day? What did I bring along with me? What did I carry on the field if necessary? I mean, in some cases, especially if you're playing at a curated field, you may not be able to eat during an actual game because they require you to wear face protection, which is fine, right? But you should have food with you at the safe zone so that you can replenish your energy. If you're playing at a milsim, you will likely have to eat during the game. Well, what are you carrying with you? So for me, I always say you should be carrying at least some sort of granola bar or protein bar or energy bar, like a Vector bar or something like that, on your person. That's 200 to 250 calories that you can eat, and then a half an hour later your fuel is coming back into your system and you're good to go. But there's a lot of other ways that you can fuel yourself throughout the day, including just as simple stuff as sandwiches. We had one player got a skip the dishes delivery of a local wing place. Well, I mean, that might be a little excessive, but you really need to think about carrying food. If you are hungry, you are definitely not going to be in the right state of mind to push and do what you need to do to win the day. I've had lots of experiences in games where I'm at a particular objective with a couple of my teammates, and I'm like, guys, what we're going to need to do now is push that objective really hard. We're going to go this way. This is the route we're going to take. We're going to run as fast as we can. And I've had players on the team who are like, I don't have the energy to do that right now. Well, that is unfortunate because that's holding the team back. And I mean, I'm not faulting those players in any respect, but if they had had maybe 2 sandwiches that morning instead of just the one, or had carried a protein bar with them and had been able to fuel up 15 minutes ago, we might have been able to make that push.
One thing I've seen a lot over the course of playing Airsoft is like people show up with a single like 500 ml bottle of water in 30-degree weather, again 30 degrees Celsius, expecting to play for 5-6 hours. That isn't enough, right? So you need to remember to bring some food. You need to remember to bring some water. You know, it's great to have a sandwich, right? So you can sit down, have lunch with your teammates, shoot the breeze for 20 minutes, and then get back into the game. But it's also great to bring like a granola bar or, as Phil said, a protein bar, just to sort of fuel up, because you're like, all right, I'm a little tired. I'm kind of worn down. It's been 6 hours since I had any food, or 4 hours or 3 hours, whatever. I'm just going to feed this into my face so that I don't get exhausted, right? It's good to make sure you have more water than you think you're going to need, so that if you get thirsty, you can just chug a bunch of it and not be concerned that you're not going to have any for later. Yes, soldiers work with, limited supplies. We're playing Airsoft. You don't have to, especially for like an 8-hour skirmish. And suffering needlessly, unless, hey, if you find that fun, if you're like, man, I want to just tough it out all day and that is how I want to play Airsoft, great, do that. Have fun. For me, no one wants to be around me when I'm hungry. So I bring food.
And especially during, at time of recording, during these COVID-19 time, you're not sharing water with other people, right? You're not sharing water. You're not sharing food with other people. You need to be self-reliant. The game that we played a couple of weeks ago, that was that all-day affair, I had 2 liters of water with me. And that still really wasn't enough for the day. I mean, I got through it just fine. I'm still alive. It's all good. And it didn't really hold me back, but I could have done with more. I had enough food for me, but I'm not going to be sharing my food with anybody else. So you really need to be conscious of making sure you have all the stuff that you need. The other piece around bringing food is making sure that you're bringing food that your body's already familiar with. Making sure that the food you've got will agree with you, so that you're not getting indigestion, or you're not having to go to the bathroom more than you normally would need to.
You don't necessarily want to bring last night's double Big Mac still in its wrapper to your Airsoft game for your sandwich for later. It might seem like a good idea, especially if you're a little hungover, and we've all played Airsoft in that state. But, the greasy McDouble is not necessarily the best idea.
Absolutely. And if you're heading to the grocery store before the game and you see that there's a brand new type of soda that you haven't seen before, or a brand new type of food item, you're like, oh, I'm going to bring this and, just try it out and stuff. You probably want to stick with stuff that you already know, right? You already know agrees with you, because if something doesn't agree with you, guess what? You're in for a world of discomfort. And if you find yourself having to use the bathroom, you might not want to do that at your local Airsoft field. You might want to go home instead, and that'll really sort of ruin your day.
Or if you're in the middle of the woods, again, you might not want to be in that situation. One thing I also want to mention is that food can be a really big morale booster for Airsoft games, for short Airsoft games and for long ones. So this is going to sound kind of silly to some people, but having a few hard candy, Werther's Original or whatever you prefer, I'm an old man, in your kit, so that you can just go, yeah, here's just a little bit of, a little bit of sugar for the system, Something puts a smile on your face, makes it easier to push through the hard spots in the day. Whether it's, I'm going to have a Werther's Original because I just got shot in the nose and it hurts. You're like, man, I'm really like kind of low on energy. This will help sort of put things back. And bring some to share. Can't necessarily share food at time of recording, as Phil mentioned, but when you can, it's good for morale. It helps keep us glued together as a team. It helps keep us in a good mental place. And that's not to be undersold.
Yeah, like Chris carries those Skittles to the game, and that helps boost his morale. And outside of COVID times, he'd share them with the team. And if you look at like military rations, generally speaking, good rations will include some of those morale items too, like chocolate or candies or something. Not charms, but a lot of these candies to help boost morale. So that's something that can really help you if you're really tired and stuff. Really can make you feel human, right, while you're playing, and help you get back in the game. So we've talked about your footwear, we talked about your dressing in layers, we talked about your hydration and your food. The other piece that's central to player comfort is how we carry our equipment, right? If you have a really crappy way of carrying your equipment, that is going to be painful for you, especially if you're in a mil sim and you have to carry your equipment all day long. There's a saying that ounces equals pounds and pounds equals pain. Well, that is doubly true if the way that you're carrying your equipment is really crappy. So we've seen people go into games and they're carrying like all their stuff in a gym bag. Well, if you're carrying that around for a whole day of milsim, you are in for a world of hurt. Even if you have a rucksack that is proper, like hiking rucksack or maybe a military rucksack that's meant to carry 80 pounds of kit or whatever, that's still a lot if the load is not distributed really well.
And one thing I really want to stress, because it's been my personal experience, if you buy load-bearing equipment of any kind for airsoft and you find it doesn't work for you, going, well, I bought it and I paid money for it, and so I'm going to try to stick it out and like learn to be comfortable in it, can only get you so far, right? We've both used a number of different kinds of backpacks over our airsoft career. They're not load-bearing equipment in terms of our mags and stuff, but we carry a lot of stuff to games, right? Water, food, during the fall and winter here, a sweater, another layer, some sort of waterproof outer layer might be in your bag. I carry TP because I'm in the woods, and, the weight does end up being non-trivial. But, at one point I ran what was essentially like a 3-day assault pack that I brought to all of my airsoft games. I didn't need that. It was huge. I put too much stuff in it because I started looking for what else can I throw in here to fill up the volume so that I feel like I'm not being as silly. And you end up carrying, like Phil said, like 60 pounds of gear on your back to an airsoft game to run around with that you don't need.
Assuming you do need all that stuff, is your pack ideally configured to enable you to be comfortable while carrying that equipment? A lot of hiking backpacks have a strap that go over your waist to help distribute the load a little bit more. The strap for the shoulder pads are reinforced and padded so they spread the weight out on your shoulders. Some packs that you see have really thin strapping. Those dig into your shoulders, right? And again, if that's very uncomfortable for you, you're going to want to ditch that as quickly as you can. The other part of your load-bearing equipment is, of course, like your actual like chest equipment. So either your plate carrier or your chest rig. And again, here, Pat and I have used a variety of different configurations over the years, starting with an M4 vest to like a Cyraz to a 1694 style, and now to JPC. And I use a JPC. Pat primarily uses a chest rig now. And again, it's a comfort thing, right? You need to make sure that when you're wearing that, it's comfortable for you. And I love my carrier. It's very comfortable. I have the elastic cummerbund, so it's very easy for me to breathe. It's very easy to move. It doesn't restrict me in any way. It doesn't restrict my breathing. But 5-6 years ago when I was using a Cyraz, I didn't have an elastic cummerbund. I just had the fabric ones. I had them cinched in as much as I could. They would restrict my breathing, and that wasn't very comfortable at all, and I couldn't wait to take it off.
And this sort of goes to, am I mimicking a loadout, or am I just trying to get the most out of whatever I'm doing? Right? So when I started playing, I used a cross-draw black tactical vest, 3 double M4 mag pouches and a pistol holster, because that's what I had. And it wasn't optimal. It worked okay. But it also didn't take me very long to realize that the mag pouches were on the wrong side of the vest for what I wanted. So I came fairly quickly to the conclusion that I wanted something MOLLE, because that allowed me to configure it, right? Configurable gear is definitely a good way to go. And so Phil and I both ended up buying the same pattern of Cyraz. Mine was a bigger version. And they were great. And they were really good vests, I gotta say, right? They're kind of big and clunky, But if you don't like getting hit in the chest, like you're like, oh man, getting hit with BBs stings too much and I'm not super into it, hey, they'll protect your chest. That's great. You can carry everything on them, and we did. But the reality of our situation as airsoft players differs a whole lot from the reality of the kits we were sort of looking at pictures of on the internet and trying to design our stuff to mimic, right? You know, I know for the first while was like, yeah, I'm carrying like 15 M4 mags, a radio, binoculars, an extra hat, a first aid kit, and it was unmanageable. It got in the way. We play at heavily wooded fields often. It hung up on everything. If I dropped prone, I basically was still 5 inches off the ground.
Yeah, for sure.
And it just was not practical for the majority of what we were doing. I don't need 15 mags. I don't need a humongous radio. I haven't needed binoculars at an airsoft game ever. The first aid kit was useful. You know, some of the mags were great to have, but like a lot of them were positioned in places where I couldn't even really effectively get to them. When I ran the P90, because I wanted to have the same vest running my P90 mags and my M4 mags, the P90 mags were like facing mag pouch flap down on my back so that I could reach behind me and rip them out pretty quickly. And that worked okay, but when I wasn't using the P90, they were added weight and added size and were just in the way. And when I was using the P90, the M4 mags were the same thing. And it was just not good.
And at the end of the day, like, even if it is comfortable to, in terms of like when you have it on, it's still very heavy. And again, you know, you're expending more energy. And in terms of your comfort, by the time your day is over, you can't wait to take it off. And we're playing airsoft. We shouldn't be in a situation where we're doing stuff that we can't wait to stop doing once we're done. Like, you should be able to keep going for extended periods of time. And so that's why over time we started minimizing our setups so that we end up with the JPC, which for me really only has the 2 plates and it's very tight fitting. It carries 6 mags and a couple of things in the wingman pockets. And that's it. Like, that's all I really need on my person at any given time. And even then you can still make a good case for switching to a chest rig, which is what Chris has done. And I've got a chest rig now that I'm sort of configuring. And you've been using a chest rig for several years now.
And I'm going to come, this is where I was sort of going earlier when I mentioned gear that you buy and that you're not happy with immediately, but everyone else on your team or a bunch of other people you know are super happy with it. So I bought a 1694 at the same time that my team were transitioning to those smaller chest rigs. Pretty much the same configuration as Phil's JPC. 2 plates, elastic cummerbund, shoulders, done. Ran 6 M4 mags, tucked another couple into the side pockets, away you go. And I hated it. I hated it the day I got it. I hated it every game I played with it. I could not turn my neck. I could not lift my arms. It was awful. Practically speaking, because it was a reproduction one from somewhere in China, made for a guy probably Phil's size, and I am not Phil's size. It was a size medium sort of chest rig, and I needed a bigger size in it. And the only way to get a bigger size in it was to buy a real one. And those are very, very expensive. And so when I started looking at options and thinking about what I wanted out of my kit personally, I realized that the plates didn't really matter to me because no one's shooting actual bullets at me, so I don't need steel plates, obviously. And in terms of the discomfort of getting shot with a BB, for the most part, I don't care. I've been shot enough that it's just like, yeah, this is whatever. It doesn't stress me out. So I was all right, well, I need lightweight. I want to carry around 8 mags. I want to carry on my secondary line. I want my first aid kit because that matters a lot to me. I want a little admin panel that I can tuck my car keys into so that I know where they are at the end of the day. That's what's on my vest. That, my push to talk for my radio hangs on the shoulder, as you'd more or less expect. It weighs nothing compared to everything else I've used. It is super comfortable. I can walk around in it for 12 hours and not notice that it's there. I can get prone. I can stand up. I can do whatever you want me to do wearing it. It does not in any way impact my combat effectiveness. I've got a multi-tool tucked onto it as well. It is perfect. It is everything I ever wanted. And when I look back at the 1694, I think, man, I wore that for 2 years and I couldn't turn my neck because the shoulders were just cutting into my neck all the time. Why didn't I ditch that immediately? Well, I was like, I want to look like one of the cool kids. I want to match my teammates. I'm way more effective with the new vest. I think back to the Cyraz, which weighed 15 times what my chest rig weighs. And I don't know why I kept it for as long as I did. I mean, it was a comfortable piece of kit, as long as you weren't hiking through bushes, getting hung up on trees, or trying to stay in it for more than 2 hours.
Or, playing airsoft.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's just like, yeah, this looks so good, but it's completely useless. And I don't need 15 M4 mags.
So at the end of the day, you can really start to get an understanding of how your comfort will directly impact your performance, right, on the field. The more comfortable you are, the less you're thinking about how stuff around you sucks, right? Your focus is going to be solely on the game. It's going to be solely on your objective, enemy players, talking to your team, coordinating fire, whatever that is. The less you're focusing on other things like your feet hurting, how cold you are, how hungry you are, how you can't turn your neck, the more you're focusing on the stuff that actually matters in the game, that makes you a more effective team member, that makes you perform better, and ultimately that helps your team secure the win, which is what we're all trying to do at the end of the day, is to have a good time and fundamentally to win.
And I mean, ultimately, in the real world, in military stuff, your equipment working for you and keeping you comfortable and keeping you safe is the end goal. The same thing applies here, and for much the same reason. The less complaints you have about your physical comfort and your current sort of physical state, the better you are at doing your job, at doing what you're there for, right? So as we've mentioned before, Phil and I are very motivated by sort of doing what we need to do for the team, making sure everything goes right so that the team is okay and we do okay and we play well and we play effectively, right? And ideally we win, but that's not the most important part. But if we lose, we want to lose because the other team did really well, not because we did really poorly. And so having comfortable kit that doesn't impede us, but rather helps us play is critical.
You're absolutely right. We don't have to win, but we play to win all the time. And if our kid is holding us back from that, then that sucks and you got to get rid of it. So at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that you're comfortable so you can focus on the things that matter during the game rather than focusing on your discomfort. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that, like we covered about today, but we encourage everyone. It's one of the lessons that we learned probably a little too late, focusing more on our comfort rather than focusing on the way that we look. If you're looking to improve your performance, that's probably one of the first places that you should start, making sure that everything is as comfortable and working as best as it can for you on the field.
And make sure that stuff isn't actively impeding you, especially, right? If you have a piece of gear that is uncomfortable, really sit down and have a think about why you're still using it.
For sure, you shouldn't be married to any of your pieces of kit. If something it could work better, then you should have no hesitation to replace it. Understanding that, there's finances and stuff involved. But yeah, if you have a piece of kit that is actively impeding you, like Pat said, it should be a no-brainer for you to just go ahead and swap it out. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we've got nothing else for you, so we'll see you next time.
Have a good day, guys.